Wonderful. Welcome back, everyone, to this Drawdown Georgia interview series. I'm really happy today to be speaking with David Eady. David is here to talk to us today about Drawdown Georgia's business compact. So I'm really excited to talk to you today, David. So thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you.
I'd like to start by asking you to introduce yourself to our audience and tell us what brought you to a career focus in sustainability, first of all.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm David Eady, Director of Industry Engagement within the Ray C. Anderson Center for Sustainable Business. And that sits within the Scheller College of Business at Georgia
Right.
Tech. Gosh, as far as like what brought me into a profession in sustainability, it really does date back to growing up, just playing in the woods and being immersed in nature throughout my formative years, and then going off to college and studying environmental ethics at the University of Georgia, which
Okay.
then, when I graduated from my undergraduate degree there, I had this passion to save the world, but absolutely no technical skills whatsoever to really have an impact. But that brought me into community organizing work with a statewide nonprofit, the Georgia Environmental Project, that I worked with, and really got a lot of great teaching and mentoring around community organizing skills, and really got to see a lot of the impacts of environmental injustices being imposed on rural communities, African American communities across Georgia and the Southeast. So, that just strengthened my conviction that I wanted to be a part of change. Also convinced me that I needed to go back to graduate school in order to become more gainfully employed. I went to Georgia State, got my master's in community planning and development, and coming out of grad school, because of networking I had done, was recruited to work with the Army Environmental Policy Institute, which supports the Secretary of the Army's office, and was sitting at an office at Georgia Tech and at Clark Atlanta University. And the reason why they were intrigued to bring me on as a fellow was because of my work in environmental justice. President Clinton had signed an executive order on environmental justice, and no one within the Army or DOD knew anything about environmental justice. So they were assembling a team of folks to work on that policy. But really worked for over 20 years of my career in bringing sustainability and environmental justice into the U.S. Army and across DOD. And part of that time was working in consulting. So I was able to really get into sustainability across a variety of subject areas, whether it's land for conservation or pollution prevention, energy management and efficiency, et cetera. Really went across the gamut. And part of that time, I was on the research faculty at Georgia Tech in the School of Public Policy. But part of that time, I was a private consultant working with different organizations. So, yeah, just been in the field for a long time.
Yes, yes. And I totally understand your nonlinear way into getting into the work that is very reminiscent of my own path. So you lead the Drawdown Georgia Business Compact, which I'd
Yeah.
love to hear more about that. Tell us about the compact. Where did the idea come from, and what types of companies have joined the compact? I think it said it's 70 companies,
Mhm.
and why should Georgia-based businesses get involved with the compact?
Yeah. When the Drawdown Georgia research team was assembled back in 2019, they were looking at what are the climate solutions that were most applicable to Georgia. And at
Mm.
the same time, we were looking at what type of corporate activity there was around decarbonization or climate action. We were seeing that even though the federal administration at the time was pulling back from the Paris Climate Accord, the corporate sector was leaning in and really accelerating some of their commitments to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions and also addressing equity issues around the same time. So we were convinced that there was opportunity to build on the leadership in the corporate sector, particularly in the absence of leadership within the federal government. So we started talking with our corporate partners about this idea of a collective impact initiative. And collective impact is a particular term, came out of academia, really is when a group has a shared mission and vision that they work towards that aligns with their individual activities. Then there's an ongoing coordinated effort to work in alignment on things that advance that common mission.
Mm.
And so we wanted to brand this collective impact initiative in alignment with the Drawdown Georgia research and say, how can the business community help it accelerate the deployment of these solutions? So around the same time that the first phase of the research was wrapping up at the end of 2020 and those solutions were announced, we were starting to organize formally what this Drawdown Georgia Business Compact would look like and how it might help advance these solutions that were coming out of the research. We had about a dozen founding members, which included folks like Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, UPS, Google, Amazon. So some real heavy hitters in the start, but also some smaller businesses, Better Earth, Gooder, they were among some of the founding members. And we said from the beginning, we wanted the group to be diverse. We wanted it to represent Georgia's economy in the full sense. We wanted to represent the big multinational companies, but also the small businesses, the startups, the minority-owned businesses, the B corporations. We also wanted to be geographically diverse. It wasn't going to be just Atlanta-centric, that we had companies that were throughout Georgia, and we do. I can speak to that a little bit more. So we came up with a list of over 100 companies that were our target list to outreach to. And we just started talking to them about the vision of companies coming together and aligning their efforts. Everyone had their own decarbonization pathway they were charting at the time. People were at different stages of that path. Some were just getting started on the journey. Some had been going quite a while. And we said, we'll focus on three things as the Ray C. Anderson Center for Sustainable Business. We'll focus on helping to organize and facilitate those collaborative efforts where it makes sense for two or more to come together and work on something. We'll also help to catalyze innovation. Georgia has a great innovation ecosystem. And so how do we just bring more, help nurture more sustainability solutions, more climate action related solutions within that innovation ecosystem? We also said we'll build a community of practice. We have all these people who are doing the work, within their respective organizations, but building community among them, sharing with each other, learning together, learning from one another. And then, we'll also keep track of progress and how we're doing across the state and how we're doing as a collective. And so we officially launched in October of 2021, had about a dozen founders, and just really started about the process of recruiting other companies to join while we were ideating around, what are the main things we should start with? Where should we focus our efforts? Because there's a whole bunch of stuff we could do, but what do we want to focus on? And one last point is that from the beginning, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just focused on climate action, just focused on decarbonization. That it also looked at how can we advance these solutions in ways that create new economic opportunities, advance equity, safeguard our natural resources, natural environment, and also address risks to public health. So I think you were involved in some of those early discussions, Eriqah, about what we were calling beyond carbon. It's not just about carbon, that we have to really bake in from the get-go this broader view of what it takes to deploy solutions that will have these additional benefits to our communities.
Right. Yeah, I remember some of that. I'm wondering, kind of a follow-up question to what you were just talking about, for businesses that might be interested in joining the Business Compact. What is the structure of the initiative right now? Like, how do you, in general terms, how do you all meet? How does that functionality work for businesses that might be interested in tapping in?
We try to keep the road to joining us fairly simple. I do usually engage with folks in a conversation, explaining more detail what the compact is, talk to them about their priorities and how they align, and even just exploring some ideas about how joining the compact might help them advance some of their priorities. Okay. But really, you just say, yeah, we align with the effort, we want to join. You agree to share what you're doing already, the stories and successes and challenges that you've experienced. And we do ask for financial donation for members, but even that's based on the size of the company. So sure. We have companies donating from $250 a year to $50,000 a year. It really can range depending on the company. We bring them in and we start to introduce them to the other members virtually at first. And then we have meetings of the whole compact. I call them all hands meetings twice a year, usually in the spring and fall. And that's a good chance to get everybody together, celebrate successes, and also to introduce new members. And then throughout the year, we'll have working groups that will be meeting on specific topics. We've been doing a lot of work around how do we bring more carbon-free electricity into the grid, and which is particularly challenging for existing industries, existing customers of the utilities, because they don't have the leverage of coming in and saying, we demand 100% renewable power. Their existing customers, they need to have the utilities offer them some ways that they can decarbonize the electricity they're using. And that's proven challenging on an individual basis. So coming together and saying we all have these common challenges, how can we work with the utilities to make some progress on that or to develop new programs? So we look for what are those kinds of initiatives where working together we're stronger and we're more impactful in our through our collective voices than through our individual efforts.
That sounds really impactful. And so you mentioned some of this already. 70 companies is very impressive for a big state like Georgia, with the ways in which economies work around the state. And of course, as you said, trying to get some diversity of region as well. So with such a big group, what are some of the initiatives that the Business Compact is working on right now?
So I mentioned about carbon-free power. That's an ongoing effort. We've had a great partnership with Georgia Power and talking through that and looking at how they can bring new programs that support industry, as well as with MEAG Power and Georgia EMC. We've looked at renewable natural gas as an intermediate step. We use a lot of natural gas in Georgia for industrial processes and for generating electricity. But we also have a lot of potential for biogas gas that can reduce the carbon intensity of the gas we're using. So we've been talking about that and what demand there might be and what opportunities there might be for collectively investing in renewable natural gas. We're also looking at sustainable aviation fuel. We have the world's busiest airport.
Yeah.
And we have, one of the largest airlines with Delta Airlines. And we have some great resources on the agricultural front and the forestry front that can be used as feedstock to make biofuel for commercial jets right here in Georgia. So we talk about Georgia grown sustainable aviation fuel as an opportunity. And it's also going to create new economic opportunity for our rural landowners, our farmers across the state. So we think there's some real good potential there. We've also talked about our forestry resources in terms of carbon sequestration, particularly our underserved landowners and our smaller acreage landowners. How do we build capacity for them to participate in the voluntary carbon market, which can be very complex to navigate? You may be hearing conflicting messages around it. And so how do you feel confident in participating in that as a landowner? And then also, how do we marry that with companies that might be a little hesitant right now because there's been a lot of negative press around it for a while. And now folks are converging and saying, no, there are good, high quality carbon credits that can be generated and sold through the voluntary carbon market. And Georgia just is really underrepresented in that market as a whole. We don't have as many projects in Georgia as we could or as other states do. So how do we get more going? Because we believe that's investing in our forestry resources, keeping forests rather than having them be converted into other things. That's another collective initiative that we've really been leaning into. One that we really are looking to get into moving forward is around how can industry help invest in improvements to homes that might need life and wellness and safety improvements, as well as energy efficiency improvements. Absolutely. So you're creating healthy living environments, reducing energy burden, and obviously lowering demand for electricity, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Support that philanthropically, but maybe we also incentivize them by generating carbon credits or other credits that they could see on their electric bill that would create more of an incentive, because there's just not enough federal and local dollars from the government side to make the level of impact that we need in Atlanta and other cities and towns across Georgia. So we really think there's a lot of opportunity there. And we're looking at piloting an effort possibly in Atlanta, working with the city of Atlanta and Georgia Power and others. So those are just a few of the initiatives that we really do try to focus on those that are, that are more conducive to collective action.
Right.
But then everyone's interested in reducing waste and creating circularity in the materials that are going out there. Plastic is a huge issue. How can we create more circularity there? And maybe there's a collective opportunity. We have great organizations like Charm that are serving as receivers of a variety of material. How do we create more of those regional collection facilities? Because a lot of it's like, how do my customers get this leftover plastic who do they give it to and how do they get it there? So there's a logistical challenge. So that's something we've been talking about, and hopefully we'll be diving more into that as we move forward.
Love hearing about all the businesses that we interact with all the time, and the fact that, you know, they're on the radar of the Business Compact. I think that's great. I love Charm. We go to Charm all the time in our house. So that's really fantastic, and I love hearing about that. And also, you know, on the equity piece around, you know, we talk a lot about making homes more energy efficient, but making them safe first. You know, a lot of the businesses and organizations that do retrofits can't even do some of those retrofits because somebody needs a new roof, or, you know, somebody needs to do, you know, insert thing here that's necessary. So the awareness of the business community on those pieces is really important. So I'm glad you mentioned.
We have some great nonprofit partners who have helped to educate us on the need and opportunity. I mean, with Groundswell, I've known Michelle Moore for a long time. She's from LaGrange, you know, and they've done some work down in LaGrange. They partnered with South Face Institute. And you realize, oh, they needed a roof, or they need their plumbing pipes replaced, or they need all new electrical. There are some basic life and safety and wellness things that need to happen to the house before you then start looking at, how do we put more insulation in the roof line? How do we put some new windows and doors on? How do we bring energy efficient appliances and electrify the appliances that are in the home? We definitely want to do those, but we got to do, like you said, some of that pre-work that's really important for creating good, healthy homes.
Absolutely. So there's a question around equity, since we're talking about it. What is the compact doing, aside from what we already mentioned, to elevate issues of equity around climate and business in the business community in Georgia?
That's a good question. I mean, being mindful as we go through the discussions, also looking to make sure we engage with partners on the initiatives that we're working. You know, when we talked about the issue about energy efficiency in homes and retrofits there, working with some of the groups that have been engaged with, whether as Atlanta or was it Rebuild ATL, was one of the early efforts to help us be aware of what those opportunities are, baking them into the initiatives. We partnered with the Georgia Forestry Foundation and the University of Georgia to apply for a grant that was specifically focused on underserved landowners and small acres landowners, making sure they were engaged in the voluntary carbon market, for example. And, you know, if we look at opportunities in renewable natural gas, or how do we make sure that we're engaging African-American farmers or women-owned farms in the opportunities to turn their material into biogas and sell it on the market. So we're just trying to be very purposeful. You know, I think intent is so important to have that in the forefront of your mind, but also in terms of who we're trying to recruit to join the compact. We want women-led businesses. We want minority-led businesses in the compact to also educate us on what are some of the challenges that they may face that we can help, you know, to elevate their opportunity for them in ways that they haven't been successful before. I know Cherry Street Energy, which is one of our early members in the compact, they have a great program of training up folks in how to install solar panels. And there's been some businesses, I can't remember the name of the company, but there was one woman in particular, African-American woman, who had been through their program, and she decided to start her own company. And so now she is really taken off in terms of being an installer, and she works with Cherry Street and others to install solar panels. And so a lot of that was just building up her capacity to set up a new business and to be successful in this area of opportunity. So I think it's really just across the board in everything we do, just trying to make sure that we are, you know, it's not an afterthought, but it's a front of mind kind of thing that we're always trying to make sure that's an important element of everything that we do.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, we talked about the way that the businesses that the compact works with are working in community, but also working for equity in business, like equity around, like you said, women-owned, minority-owned businesses in the state, and trying to recruit them to the compact. And I'm glad you're saying that, because I think when people hear things like that, you know, Georgia Business Compact, they're thinking about the big industry folks. They're thinking about the large. Immediately when I first heard it, I was thinking about, you know, our large businesses, like your Deltas, like your, you know, your other big. So to know that those companies, those smaller companies, not only have a place in the business compact, which is really important, but also have a voice in the
Yeah.
business compact to come to say, here are the issues that we're dealing with that are unique to us, that you all are
Yeah.
not used to,
Yeah.
because you don't have
Exactly.
types of challenges, and we have all these, systems of oppression overlaying us, and you all have, different sorts of privileges that you're working with.
Mhm. Exactly. And a lot of times that's where a lot of innovation is coming from. That's where a lot of new employment opportunities are coming from. There's a lot of growth opportunity there. How do we nurture that instead of within these incumbent industries that are well established? How can they contribute to industry as a whole, as a community? And then also look at how they impact in the communities where where they are. Most of the companies that are part of the compact, they are very engaged in their local communities and have different initiatives there as well. There's sort of a self-selection bias in that companies that join are companies that want to be having a positive impact, not just to be about profit. They obviously want to be profitable. They have to be profitable. They see sustainability and climate action as strategic imperatives for their business, but they also see it as a moral obligation to be contributing in a positive way to the communities where their employees work and live. So, it's a lot of great companies, like I said, brands, but then also scrappy startups that you don't know. Good Agriculture, that's a woman-owned business trying to help farmers. They do all the sort of back of house stuff that it takes to run a farm from a business perspective. Farmers are really good at growing food, but they aren't necessarily good at managing the business of farming. In the sense of finding markets and even managing your finances and tracking all that. So, they provide support to farms, particularly smaller farms, minority owned farms across the state and Southeast and elsewhere. So they're a great, scrappy little startup company that joined the compact. And, we try to elevate what they're doing to make people aware and hopefully bring more clients to them.
I love that. Switching gears a little bit, working with people, especially people of all different types of businesses. It's always been running kind of a network of folks, as I've done a few times in my career. People are coming from all different lenses and experiences. So what has surprised you the most about your work with industry and with the business compact companies?
Wow, what has surprised me most? That's a tough question. It's hard to challenge me or surprise me, but I mean, I think I've been most surprised actually by the innovative spirit of some of the smaller companies that have really started from a place of, they just see a need, and they say, I can do something about that and still make money doing it. Rataza is another company. Kashi Sego, sitting there during COVID, seeing truckloads of produce getting dumped because they didn't have a customer or someone to buy it, a market to take it to. And she said, that should never happen. We've got people who are going hungry, all the while we've got food being wasted from field to grocery store or to your table. How can we work on that? And that's a logistical problem. How can I help to address that? Jasmine Crow Houston's story, seeing people in need, people hungry, cooking food herself and bringing it out there to feed people, but then realizing that there's a lot of other prepared food that's just going to waste, that she could create a company to collect that and deliver it to the organizations that are feeding folks that are in need. So much food that is wasted could instead be used to feed folks that are going hungry. So, those are just two organizations that I'm blown away by their purpose-driven mission, but it's not at the expense of making money and being successful as an enterprise. These aren't nonprofits. They have gone the B Corp route. That just says we as a company have baked in a public benefit as part of our mission, but it doesn't say we don't want to be profitable. It says we do want to be profitable, but we want to be purpose-driven and put people at the forefront of our business. And I just continue to be impressed by the people who recognize those needs and can find innovative ways to bring solutions and have significant impact on people's lives. So I guess that's probably the biggest area where I've been surprised and blown away by.
That's so important. And I'm glad you keep mentioning that about there's a place and space for nonprofits. That is the work that I do and the work that I've always done. And also there's a place and space for businesses to be beneficial to the community while also being profitable. And understanding that those organizations like the B Corps are the public benefit, but there's also revenue. There's a revenue
Yeah.
stream as well, which is so important, especially for those folks that are in minority owned businesses. And I think again, it's so cool to hear them being in the same room and having the same voice space
Yeah.
as bigger businesses that might still want to do well, but sometimes it's harder when you're trying to generate so much revenue to
Yeah.
see what blind spots are of doing the best you can for the community as well. So I think that's a really good point you're making about this space and really beneficial and an attractive point for being a part of this network.
And I think it's incumbent upon us also as Georgia Tech to give platform to a diverse group of businesses and let people be aware of who they are and what the opportunity is for working with them. Several of those companies that I mentioned, as a result of the compact, they've been able to create partnerships with companies like Norfolk Southern, and collecting up excess food from their food services. All these big companies have food courts in their buildings and they have food service partners. So partnering with them to make sure food's diverted, or maybe connecting them with nonprofits like the Common Market or with for-profits like Ritaza to buy produce that goes to these food service companies that's locally grown here in Georgia. So, it's been neat to use those skills of creating networks and creating connections, building partnerships, and seeing them take advantage of the opportunity to partner with businesses. And then there's also, it doesn't even have to be small businesses to big businesses. We've also created a digital platform using Meta Impact where people can see what each other is doing, what initiatives they have going on. They could see some of the partnerships that have formed between member companies, and they could say, hey, I'd love to connect with you. I'd love to learn more about that. I'd like to join your effort there. So creating visibility to what all's going on and making people aware of the capacity and capabilities of each company, as well as what their priorities and initiatives are that they might want to engage with them on. Really, I think the companies have said the community aspect has been one of the biggest positive impacts they've experienced from being a part of the Drawdown Georgia Business Compact. Getting to know other companies, hearing about their successes and getting inspired by that, or just learning about new companies that they had never heard of that they might want to partner with. So, that learning together and sharing with one another and connecting with each other has been such an important part. Eriqah, you know this from your work in organizing. That's an important part really of any kind of movement type effort, is understanding your connection to something bigger than just what you're doing and figure out how do I join on this in this larger effort and amplify my impact, by being a part of this broader movement of folks that are trying to make a difference here in Georgia and across the Southeast and even globally.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And that type of community, whether it is in a nonprofit space or in a business space, but building community, I think is the common thread between the work that you and I do is that building of the community of the space of the network that you're hosting is really important for those changes to happen. So that's really fantastic to see that on the other side. Thank you so much, David, for this insight on the Drawdown Georgia Business Compact. And we will make sure that folks get information on how to join, because I know there will be more folks that will be interested in joining the compact after seeing this interview. My favorite question is coming up. It's our last question, and I'd love to hear from you. What is giving you hope around climate in Georgia?
I mean, I kind of alluded to it already, and it's, these rock stars like Jasmine and Kashi, and also, folks like Savannah Seidel, and that are out there making an impact while making a profit in the work that they do. I've told my sons, and I tell students that all the while when the federal government may be letting you down or may not be as aligned with your values, that was very maybe disheartening, but you could look and see, well, there are folks still that are committed, and and industry is still taking action. Paul Hawken wrote the book Ecology of Commerce, which was the book that really catalyzed Ray Anderson's shift towards being a champion for sustainability, the interface. And he talked about how commerce has the resources to really have an impact at a level that business doesn't. And so I think seeing businesses recognize their potential and to bring their resources to bear on these very complex challenges that we face, like climate change, like racial justice and racial injustice, does give me hope. It's the people that I come in contact with on a very personal level that just inspire me, that continue to make me feel good about coming to work every day.
Absolutely. And I say all the time, I've said it on this show before as well. It's very easy to write Georgia and the South off, but I think what makes places like Georgia in initiatives and efforts like Drawdown and initiatives and efforts like the Georgia Business Compact, what makes them so impactful is then sometimes under impossible circumstances, folks are still doing really fantastic and impactful work, and the work is not stopping. And even in the time that we're in now, the work is continuing, and folks are finding interesting ways to get around certain things and still make sure that their work is aligned with their values. And I think whether you're a nonprofit or a B Corp or a corporation, there are ways to do that. So I'm glad that places like the Business Compact exist, and I'm glad that you are helping to make sure that they continue to exist. Thank you so much, David. Thank you for your work. Thank you for coming to tell us about the Drawdown Georgia Business Compact. And as I said to our audience, we will make sure that folks get information on how to join the Business Compact and connect with David and the folks over there at Georgia Tech and at Drawdown in this fantastic effort. Thank you, David, for being here once again. Thank you for giving us the information about the Drawdown Georgia Business Compact. And thank you all so much for being here with me once again. I hope you'll join us next month for another interview of a great Georgia climate leader. Thank you. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Eriqah. Really enjoyed talking with you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody.